Hey everyone, I'm Dylan Mitchell, and this is the Rincon Horizons podcast. This show is about leadership, what it really takes to grow, to adapt, and to reach the summit over the course of your leadership journey. Our goal is simple: to help you lead better so your organization can climb higher. Welcome back to the Rincon Horizons podcast. We're picking up right where we left off with Rincon Aerospace Managing Partner Todd Tuttle and John Nixon, Group Vice President of Process Industries at Siemens.
We've been running cars and trucks and buses and trains on low-carbon alternative energy sources for quite a while, many years. But it's really not the case in aerospace. And aircraft are still almost entirely fossil fuel-based. What's it going to take to change that from an energy standpoint?
Now, Todd, we've talked about this before.
We have.
We'll share it with our audience.
We've talked about it quite a bit before.
Yeah, and I loved working with you on vertical takeoff and landing. We'll talk about that here for a moment. I think you are starting to see real movement in aerospace. You would probably know better than I, being a lead consultant in this industry. What I see is there's electric aircraft now flying today. Now, it's primarily small, very short-range aircraft. I've seen headlines on training aircraft, the work we did on vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL. You're seeing electric aircraft there, and maybe short hop regional demonstrations. And these are real. I mean, it's not theoretical, but I think there's a distinction and something our audience needs to be cognizant of. There's a tremendous limiting factor here of energy density. Jet fuel has around 45 megajoules per kilogram, whereas batteries are like 9/10 or maybe 1 megajoule per kilogram. I mean, you're looking at somewhere between 40 and a 50x gap.
Yeah, it's a much higher energy density. And the cool thing about jet fuel is when you burn it, the weight goes away.
Yes.
And your aircraft gets lighter, and a battery doesn't get lighter when the electrons move. It weighs the same, full or empty.
And if I go back to my military days, I always think about, what about refuel? You can't recharge like you refuel in flights.
Well, Tesla thought you could, but I don't think we've ever realized what Tesla came up with, but maybe someday.
And again, I'm just speaking from what we see in front of us today.
You are correct. And today we do not have that technology today. That's correct.
Well, and so you see a segmentation, right? Flight training, air mobility, regional hops. That's great. But if you look at commercial aviation, long haul flights, heavy payload missions, I mentioned the military. The math is difficult because you'd need orders of magnitude more battery mass. But what does that do? What's your trade-off then? Passengers and cargo. You have to think about that. We talked about this briefly in the past, Todd, and I was thinking about this before I joined you on this episode today, which is hydrogen has some promise. It is 3x the energy of jet fuel by weight, but it requires 4x the volume. And of course, you have to keep things cryogenic. It's very much a challenge around hydrogen. So that's not a silver bullet right now.
And we don't have all this infrastructure of hydrogen just flowing everywhere through the world so that we can just put more hydrogen in our aircraft if we want to, like we can electricity.
I mean, whole different handling scenario.
So you're telling me there's no hope, John? Is that what you're telling me?
No. I think what you're going to see, what is it in J.R. Tolkien? Not one ring to rule them all. Right. There's not one fuel to rule them all. It's just, I think there's a segmentation, and you'll see electric makes sense in maybe crop dusting versus moving 400 people 10,000 miles. So
we're a long way from an electric aircraft moving a whole bunch of people a long distance.
Right.
But what about nuclear? Because the thing that's so interesting to me, and John, you and I have talked about this before, nuclear-powered aircraft scare a lot of people, but I just think that when I think about energy density and all these kinds of things, if we can just get these small modular reactors a little lighter, a little smaller, a little safer, are we going to see those on aircraft, do you think? Not in the next 5 years. I don't think the FAA is going to certify that, but maybe eventually.
Well, anything is possible. We already have small modular reactors on submarines. They're already in aircraft carriers. They're already in close proximity to humans that we move over long distances in harsh conditions called the ocean. We've already done that. But it's kind of like, as much as I hate to acknowledge it, but there's the emotional component to our species, which is you tell people about that, but then when you remind them, we've been moving hundreds and thousands of humans in close proximity to small modular reactors for decades, and it's called the U.S. military, and in stormy conditions in the middle of the Pacific and Atlantic. I think we'll have to, like we've done with small modular reactors on terrestrial applications, like we're doing now, where it's now becoming part of the psyche of our species that, you know what, it is a viable option. It is one that we're going to manage, and we're going to manage correctly. The technology is vastly different than it was in 1970. So will we see it in aircraft? Again, it depends on weight and payload, doesn't it? It depends on whether we can get that much energy density safely into a small footprint.
We got to increase the energy density footprint a bit, reduce the weight.
That kind of answers a question that I had too, kind of thinking about public perception and reception, I guess. I can talk to people now, and I won't name names or places, that are still very on the fence about the idea of even an EV. I think many people are much more on board with the idea of EVs. But whenever you translate that into like alternative fuel for aviation, how long do you think it takes for the public to be like, oh, well, this obviously we would do it this way. It's not theoretical anymore. We're just going to do it that way.
Think about this, Dylan. Let's play suppose. You go to the airport next week, you get on the plane, and you say, welcome to autonomous airlines. This is the first aircraft. We don't have a pilot anymore. The jet's just going to fly itself. If that announcement was made, how many people would get off the aircraft? Probably all of them. Probably all of them. But the reality is, the way aircraft operate today, 95% of the flight that you just took last month, that John just took last week, was operated autonomously. And an aircraft can operate almost entirely autonomously now. Pilots listen to this podcast too. I don't want to get them mad at me. And I've talked to pilots about this, and they say, well, a key reason to have pilots, and not just one pilot, but two pilots in the cockpit, is for safety, because there are things that autonomy cannot do. And the pilots are there for the bad things that happen, and certainly they do. And we haven't solved all those problems yet, but we're working towards a future where we're going to solve those problems. And like John has said about energy, it's true about a lot of technology. A lot of times the technology gets there way before the public perception and acceptance will. Who wants to have a nuclear energy source flying over their house all the time that might crash down on top of it? Well, that's a scary thing to happen. But the reality is that doesn't happen very often. It's a matter of perception. It's a matter of safety. It's a matter of technology.
Well, there's thousands of gallons of jet fuel flying over your house all the time. I think it's just a matter of education, perception. Look at Tesla. It wasn't like somebody just snapped their fingers. People started to purchase them, and then it was found that, oh my gosh, I'm starting to lose my fear of not being able to find a charging station. And so behaviors changed. We haven't seen the elimination of fossil fuel vehicles. You still see those, and you're going to see it for some time. It's not something that happens literally overnight. It's not like the automobile replacing horses. Now, that was a dramatic shift. If you look at, you can find pictures of New York City where I think over the span of 18 months, it went from all horses to all cars. There have been those moments, but for us, I think when it comes to electrification and sources of power, there hasn't been that silver bullet moment, but it's over time. Now I see Teslas everywhere. I see Tesla vehicles all over the place, and people use them especially for short hauls all around the city. It's just a matter of time, I think, before we see growth around electric aircraft. But again, I go back to what we're talking about now, which is the trade-offs you have to make. And the energy equation, it's the gating factor, if you will.
It all comes back to power. Back to power.
Right.
John, what else can the A&D industry learn from the energy industry, would you say?
Energy has had to operate at scale under risk for a long time. That teaches you discipline. Discipline around safety, you mentioned that earlier, discipline around asset management, discipline around long life cycle systems. And I think aerospace and defense can take a lot from that, especially as systems become more complex and they're software driven. The other big lesson is you really can't separate operations from design. The best companies today are closing that loop. What they learn in the field informs how they design the next generation. You hear the term digital thread a lot, and quite frankly, that is the analogy we're drawing here. Is that there is this thread back from field operations into next-gen design. But you've seen that in aerospace over decades where there's always constant improvement. And so I think we both are following the same path of, with ever-growing complexity comes an ever-growing demand of high-fidelity navigation of that complexity, so that if I'm having issues, or it's not always has to be negative, if I find something's working really well, I need to be able to sift through the layers of data that are created and be able to find those insights that lead to better design, and that better design leading to better operations. So I don't know if it's as much what aerospace can take from energy, but I think we're both faced with the same degrees of complexity, different environments, different scope of work, different challenges. When you look at the complexity of a Boeing aircraft, you've shown me that before. I'm like, My goodness. And when I can show you the complexity of a chemical plant at scale, and it's like, wow, different orders of magnitude. But like I said, I've seen a lot of aerospace people coming into energy. It's an exciting time.
John, if you don't mind, let's shift over into leadership for a minute since this is a leadership show. You've invested a lot of time in developing future leaders through mentoring, university partnerships, and the work that you've done with interns over the years, as we talked about in our pre-production meeting. Why has that become such an important part of how you lead? And as a follow-up question to that, when you look at the next generation entering into the workforce, what do you think experienced leaders owe them right now?
This means a lot to me, this question. For me, this is personal. I've had points in my career where I didn't have a roadmap. I had to figure things out the hard way. If I can shorten the curve for anyone, even a little bit, that matters. What leaders owe the next generation right now is clarity and opportunity. Clarity about what skills matter and opportunities to actually apply them. You mentioned that I have interns. I've got every summer now for the last 3 summers, I've been given the opportunity by Siemens to take on high school interns. I cannot tell you how amazing they are right out of the gate. If we had any fear of handing the baton to the next generation, that's gone because the innovation I've seen has been out of sight. It's outstanding. And the beauty is we're bringing in high school and college interns. We're not telling them, fetch my coffee. We're telling them, I want you to reverse engineer a chemical plant. I want you to learn how to simulate the handling of materials in a factory floor. And I want you to help design it. I want you to help improve that design. This world that we're in, it's changing fast. AI, we've talked about new energy systems, new ways of working. It's not just about teaching. It's about creating these environments where they learn by doing. And I get so excited about it. If I just give me a moment, I'm going to be selfish for a second here. A couple of summers ago, we had a tropical storm come through Houston, knocked all the power out for a week. And it was the first week I had my interns. We had only had a couple of days to just get started. And then all of a sudden I can't reach them. So I'm sitting here freaking out, thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to get online. We've got to get back up and running here. And I'm getting a little bit of cell service. If I go all the way down to the parking lot, I'm sitting outside of Starbucks and having a coffee and I'm on their Wi-Fi. But when all the power came back, and it had been about, call it 4 days, the shyest person on the team, she had stepped up, organized all the interns, had taken all of the point cloud scans we had of a chemical plant, had subdivided the work. So different people were doing the reverse engineering, which at the time was very manual. And we're going through that effort, had taught themselves our software, had figured out how to get on YouTube, even though we didn't really have any power anywhere, but somehow, somewhere they had gone to a Starbucks somewhere and they started teaching themselves. And after 4 days, they had gotten through about a third of the chemical plant, reverse engineering and teaching themselves that. And I remember looking at her and I was just big grin and I'm looking at them on Teams. We're all talking and I had come on with a full head of steam. I was like, okay, we got to get started. And they were like, hey, John, hang on. Let's take, and so they take me through this presentation. And at the end of it, I'm like, are you just telling me, old man John, get out of the way? And of course, they're all laughing. And I'm like, you couldn't be more excited. So here's what I did, though. Maybe she's about to learn something if she listens to this podcast. I wanted this young woman who, again, just out of high school, had just graduated, hadn't even started her freshman year yet, was about to at the University of Houston as a mechanical engineer. And I had wanted her to present to an extended team on Microsoft Teams, like 300-400 people all around the world, this process they had come up with that at the time we needed to be able to show efficacy around being able to reverse engineer, consume it, put it in our software. And I figured if we can do it with high school graduates, people will understand this is something that's tangible and real and it's a capability. So I told her, I want you to now go through the process you and your team have created with all these people. She was, I can't do this. There's too many people. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll go through it online. You be on the call with me. And when they ask questions I don't have the answers to, can you do? Oh, yeah, I can do that. So 5 minutes before we started the call, what did I do? I told her, my laptop's down. I can't do the presentation. I need you to step up. I need you to say, I need your help, please. So she said, all right, I got it. Of course, I don't think she put 2 and 2 together that I was actually communicating to her through my laptop at the time that I was saying this. But that's okay. She knocked it out of the park. It's this kind of investment that is so rewarding to see how no matter what challenge I've thrown at and you can't say kids anymore, these young adults, not only do they step up to the plate, but they surpass all my expectations. So we as leaders, we absolutely must invest in that next generation because they're ready for it. They're ready to step up.
Wow. That's I mean, on a much more minor scale, I know with my years in church, I've had multiple interns over the years, and I would echo a very similar sentiment. It's so rewarding for me. It almost feels selfish on my end that I continue to want interns because I enjoyed talking to them. I enjoyed what I learned from them too. And even at that level, looking at it is like, hey, this is a two-way street. You're teaching me just as much as I'm maybe teaching you and helping you.
100%. You learn by teaching and vice versa. So it's just amazing.
One thing we like to come back to on every episode is a segment that we call the Leadership Corner. I think that's applicable, kind of transitioning out of that. I think that every leader has a few moments in their career or in their life even that they can point to and say, that changed me. Maybe it's a risk you took. Maybe it's a mistake, a challenge you didn't feel ready for. When you think about your leadership journey, John, what's a story that still shapes the way you lead?
I think you learned earlier about some turning points in my life that have formed me. I will say that if I may again, be slightly selfish. It's not so much just one single moment, I would say. I would say that I have had to step up and do things that were about taking risk. And it wasn't just about taking risk, but actually seeking it out and embracing it and then working through it. I talked about the program management office I ran. Well, it turned out we had account managers telling one story, program managers telling another, field engineers telling another. No one knew what was going on. So I created what was called the Nixon reports, where I took everyone's data and ran a comparative analysis about what everybody was reporting, and I served it up to the executive staff. Of course, that set off a bomb internally at the company because it was like nothing was adding up. You have to actually embrace the reality of life, not run away from it, and work through it. When I was in the U.S. Army in 1992, they passed the Federal Facilities Compliance Act, where federal facilities had to meet the same environmental and safety requirements that were put on industry. Hello. We're still dealing with human beings. And at the time, Fort Hood, Texas got fined $2.5 million for environmental violations. Well, I walked up to the division commander's office and I said, you know what you need is a young lieutenant with a civil engineering degree that can clean up this mess. And they said, well, who would that be, lieutenant with a civil engineering degree? I said, well, that would be me. So we created the first ever environmental engineer position for the 1st Cav Division while I was still stationed there. And then when I was in Romania, working with the United Nations, we were standing in the middle of Rimas-Opreanu, and it was in other townships there. And everybody was like, well, how do we even get started? And I remember looking down at a manhole and going, right here. This is manhole 001. We start the job today right here. And we started going through and robotically mapping out their wastewater system and everything. For me, leadership is about the fact that life is filled with risk. You actually seek it out. You actually move towards it. You move towards the fire. Now, you make sure you're prepared for it, but you don't shy away from it. In fact, it seems scarier to me to remain stationary or to simply run with the herd right off the edge of the cliff. That seems more hazardous to me. A life without risk is not a life worth living. It is not safe. Risk is our business. And leading through risk may not appear to be a safe position to take, but I'll tell you, from my experience, it is the most rewarding.
Todd, I'd say clip it. That's what we want to.
So we're done?
I think we can be done.
Not quite done, but almost done today. Yeah. You can tell, you can see the passion in John's voice. I could really hear the passion in that. That's great.
One other thing we like to do before we wrap up is talk about what's influencing our thinking lately. It's become a recurring segment we do on the show. Initially, it was a book recommendation, but we've decided to morph it. This can be a book, a podcast, newsletter, even a conversation, really anything that's helped shape and sharpen your perspective as a leader. Todd, if you don't mind, let's start with you. What's something you've been learning from lately that you'd recommend?
Recommend a podcast. It's called the AZ TechCast. I'm talking a lot about Arizona today. I'm a member of something called the Arizona Technology Council. And the Tech Council works to connect technology companies across the whole state of Arizona. They host events. They do all kinds of great things with public policy. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're in Arizona and you're not part of the council, my question is, why not? Join the council. Check out the podcast. It's called the AZ TechCast. I recommend you listen. I'll put links in the show notes.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Todd. John, you're someone who's constantly operating at the intersection of technology, industry leadership. We've learned that today, certainly. What's been influencing your thinking lately?
I'm learning from a large mix of sources, technical papers, industry conversations. Honestly, my customers hold a wealth of knowledge, and we just need to listen. To be specific on sources, though, I read a lot of Substack. There's a lot of great stuff in Substack. Wall Street Journal, I still subscribe. They still wealth of knowledge. I listen to a range of process industry related podcasts. In my current role, I seek out sources on strategy, for example. There's a book I'm reading now, and it's called Playing to Win, from a former CEO of Procter & Gamble. I had heard some great reviews of it, so I was going to check it out. You don't just learn from books anymore. It's books, it's podcasts, it's a constant trolling for information. And thanks to like this environment here, for example, there's no shortage of it. It's actually filtering through all of it. That is a bit of a challenge. And I don't just, if I may, again, if I can just take a little bolt on here of information, it's not, to me, we talk about leadership. And leadership is competence. It starts with being competent. And I realize that, but I think you have to be emotionally intuitive as a leader. When you're reading, when you're ingesting information, I think in order to spark that interest in the people who I wish to lead, I think I need to be a more holistic person. So I've gone back and I'm starting to reread. My father passed away a couple of years ago, and I was going through his bookshelf and looking at some things he had there, and there was a book in the collected works of Shakespeare, so I grabbed that, and I've been rereading classics, Shakespeare, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Mary Shelley. These are the classics that remind me of the depth of our species. And as a leader, I think you need to have intellectual range and competency, but you also have to have depth and intentional curation of the human condition. And I think we forget that. I would charge people who are listening to this podcast, which is so awesome. I love listening to your episodes, that if you're going to be out there in charge of humans, and by the way, humans are always going to be in the loop. They're always going to be ever present. You need to be not only competent so that they can rely upon your leadership, but you also need to be emotionally intuitive and understand that we're all so very different as individuals. We're all multifaceted. We're all amazing. And it's truly a trip to work with a diverse cast every day here at Siemens.
What an answer. Now I want to go read something else, anything else. I'm going to go dig out my C.S. Lewis now.
Well, it kind of makes you feel undereducated to be on a podcast with John, doesn't it? Doesn't it, Dylan?
So think about Mary Shelley. She writes Frankenstein on a bet. But here's the thing. When you read it, you're not only reading about the monster and he's not a monster. Actually, the monster is the human that created him. But it was also, what's interesting is the body was reanimated with electricity, and it showed kind of at that time with our species this fear of this thing called electricity, and what could it be used for? How could it be misused? Where have we seen that again and again in literature? But it's always cool to have these kind of literary references when you're having conversations at a trade show or whatever, because it gives people pause to think like, right. Exactly. So when we replaced whale oil with kerosene and kerosene with electrified street lamps, when you always hear this thing about how AI is going to destroy jobs, and I'm sitting here going, well, every time there's been a technological advance, there's been fear, from Frankenstein to street lamps. But I look at AI as it's here. And like all things, I just don't go grab a high power line. I'm just not going to turn AI loose on everything. Yes, there are going to be guardrails, but it's a technology that when used correctly advances the human condition. Hello.
So maybe that's the podcast title, Don't Grab a High Power Line. Maybe that's what we'll call it.
Exactly.
Advice from John Nixon, don't grab a high power line.
That's right.
So Dylan, what about you? What have you been learning from lately?
I don't even want to say now.
I'm glad I got to go first.
Honestly, no, for me, it's a podcast. I've been listening quite a bit to the Naval Aviation Ready Room podcast with Ryan Keyes. If you have any interest in naval aviation, military history, or honestly just really good storytelling, definitely worth to add to your list. The whole show's really good, but lately I've really enjoyed the episodes featuring a retired Navy captain, Tim Lucky Kinsella. And one of the series he does it's called Footnotes of History. The premise is something that I love. We all know the major battles, famous leaders, stories that make it into the history books. But what Lucky explores is the overlooked stories, the obscure events, forgotten people, and sometimes honestly unbelievable moments that don't seem to get the same attention. And as someone who loves both leadership and history, it's just a really good reminder that some of the most valuable lessons aren't always found in the headline stories. Sometimes they're buried in the footnotes. That's the title, Footnotes of History. If you're looking for something new to listen to, definitely recommend the podcast, and we'll make sure we get the link in the show notes. A small plug, one of our former guests on this podcast is actually on that podcast. If you want to try to figure that out, that's a fun Easter egg for you.
I got to look into that.
Yeah.
Todd, we've covered a lot of ground today, covered a lot of air and space, used a lot of energy to cover a lot of air and space. As you think about everything we talked about from energy and AI to leadership and risk, what's one takeaway you'd leave with our listeners?
I think it's pretty obvious if you think about John, and I wanted John on this podcast because he's not just in charge of process industry or the energy industry. John is a high energy person. He's just a fun person. He's contagious to be around. He's got energy for the energy industry, I guess I'd say. And
there you go.
Energy for the industry energy. But I think more than that, if I think about my favorite part of the things Tom said today was when he talked about working with the interns. And I was always so impressed because we're on an industry team at Siemens, whether or not we compete with each other, whether we admitted it or not. And I think in the area of interns, we all had interns, we all worked with interns, but I was always so impressed with all the things that John had done with interns and all the things he was doing with universities and those kind of things, the things that I think I took away that I needed to learn from and get better. And I want to thank John for coming on the podcast and for all that he does for the industry and especially all he's doing to pour into future leaders.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I'll tell you that. This is a wonderful series. I've been absorbing what you shared, Todd, over the years. It's always wonderful to work with you. If I were to take a moment here and share one last point, I would say that when I mention complexity, when I mention risk, it's the norm. It's not the exception now. I think as we've talked about here on this episode, you see that our combining of nuclear and data centers or going to the moon or expanding out to Mars and everything from space to terrestrial implementations, complexity is only going to grow. And I'll tell you, there's one thing that, and Tony Himmelgarn, our CEO, he always gets on stage and he always talks about complexity as a competitive advantage. And that aligns with my personal credo of moving towards the fire, seeking out the risk. So in my view, when I hear Tony say that, I hear him saying, seek out the complexity. Work through it, design solutions for it. And that applies for us here in aerospace as well as energy. If you're a leader, seek out risk, seek out complexity, tease that out of your team, require it from them, and then work through it.
John, thanks so much for spending time with us today. I was going to say I'll give you the final word, but that's the final word, I think. Before I get into the close, you actually have your own podcast. Isn't that the Industry Forward podcast?
Yes, it's the Industry Forward podcast. And you know who will be happy that I mentioned this on your podcast will be Kate Eby, who works with us here at...
Shout out to Kate. How you doing, Kate?
So she's wonderful to work with. She's been leading that effort. And it's a great podcast. I'd welcome anybody. Thank you for mentioning it. It's absolutely wonderful to do everything I can to share as much information as possible.
Wonderful. We will put the link to that in the show notes as well as a link to your LinkedIn, John, as long as you're fine with people connecting with you over there and you want to make some new friends. But Todd, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening. Every episode of Rincon Horizons is about unpacking the decisions and disciplines that shape us all as leaders at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Our goal is simple: to help you lead better so your organization can climb higher. If today's conversation challenged you or encouraged you, share it with someone who's thinking about making the leap. You can also learn more about Rincon Aerospace or connect with Todd through the links in the show notes or at rincon.aero. That's RINCON.aero. I'm Dylan Mitchell. You can learn more about my work at dm.supply. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Rincon Horizons.